Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Enoch Pratt Free Library. I'm Carla Hayden, the CEO of the Pratt Library, and when I saw Dr. Knight, I wish I could have said I was Dr. Knight. We are so honored to have you here at the Central Library of the Enoch Pratt Free Library. You may know that it is Maryland's state library, and it serves as a resource for Marylanders from the western shore, or the western part, to the eastern shore. And we are delighted to have what I call the literary Oscars here at the Pratt Library, the Sophie Kerr Awards, and we want to thank Washington College for choosing the Pratt Library for this momentous occasion. My congratulations to the nominees. I must tell you, it was easy to pick them out before they sat down because they were nervous and kind of jittery, and we wish you the best on your writing careers, and don't forget the Pratt Library with your first publications. Hope to see you. So thank you all for coming this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again. And now, here is Dr. Knight.
Thank you, Carla. Good evening. I am the acting chair of the English department and the Sophie Kerr Committee at Washington College. I wish I could tell you or find the words to help you understand how thrilled I am that this day has arrived and how thrilled I am to see you all here tonight as we prepare to award the 47th Sophie Kerr Prize winner. Before we hear from our special guest, Mary Jo Salter, and our 5 finalists, I want to thank the members of the Sophie Kerr Committee who invested considerable time and effort reading the 32 portfolios that were submitted this year. Those committee members are Professor Jean Dubrow, Richard Gillen, James Hall, Crystal Curzon, Sean Meehan, Bob Mooney, Elizabeth O'Connor, Courtney Rydell, Kathy Wagner, and Phil Walsh. In addition, another department colleague, Barbara Gillen, and Lindsay Lusby, the Assistant Director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House, and Katie McEnroe and Ryan Montevelli-Olliner. I think I got that right, Ryan. Both from admissions were on hand for a lively discussion at Gilman School earlier today, where we met with Gilman School students and Roland Park Country School students. We are so appreciative that Jeff Christ graciously hosted us again at Gilman School, and we're really appreciative again for that visit. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome former Sophie Kerr Prize winners who were able to join us today: Katie Mannion, Leon Daly, Michelle Balsey, Doug Rose, and Norman Prentice. Washington College is especially thankful that Carla Hayden and the Enoch Pratt Library were willing and able to partner with us again on this event, that Washington College board members and alums, Debbie Turner and George Wills, hosted us again for dinner, and that the Baltimore Alumni Association supported their alma mater again to make this event possible. Please know that we do not take your continued support for granted. Tonight, we are here to honor the legacy of Sophie Kerr, a writer who was born on the other side of the bay in 1880 and earned 2 college degrees at a time when it was not common for women to do so. She purchased a house in New York and lived there from 1920 until her death in 1865 at the age of 84. And over the course of her 40-year career, she served as the managing editor of Women's Home Companion. She published 23 novels, 500 short stories, numerous articles in popular magazines of her day, and she saw at least one play that she wrote run on Broadway and then turned into a Hollywood film. I should note that although most of Sophie Kerr's novels are set in New York City, 3 of them are set on the Eastern Shore, as well as a collection of short stories. As many of you know, nearly 50 years ago, when Sophie Kerr left money to Washington College in her will, she stipulated that half the annual earnings be given each year to the graduating senior who shows the most literary promise. At $61,382, the Sophie Kerr Prize is still, we believe, the largest undergraduate literary prize in the world. She also specified that her money be spent on scholarships for promising writers, books, campus events by writers and scholars, and as a result, over 200 well-known writers, including Colin McCann, Toni Morrison, Robert Pinsky, Jane Smiley, and Junot Diaz, have read from their works on campus. This past March, on Sophie Kerr Saturday, Ruth Shoge and Amanda Kramer unveiled an exhibit at Miller Library, which displayed Sophie's personal effects. Some of us know that she was a voracious reader and an industrious writer who took as her subject matter everything from love and romance to cookery and cats. But Sophie really comes to life when you see books from her personal collection and when you see her needlepoint rug that she placed under her cat's dishes. There's something about looking at those objects that really makes her come to life and seem more real and personal for us. Sophie Kerr's gift has made Washington College the literary haven that it is today. And as we look ahead to another 47 years and more, I hope our literary and personal endearment for her grows. And I hope that we will continue to have these wonderful opportunities to help people get to know and appreciate Sophie Kerr, the writer, the woman, and our legend. Thank you again for coming, and now I will turn the podium over to my colleague James Hall, who will introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
This is a night where I'm just very proud to be a conduit, basically. And I'm proud to introduce Mary Jo Salter. A potential for future literary endeavor, that's the main criterion which guides the committee in its annual selection of the Sophie Kerr Prize. Literary endeavor is a broad term which can encompass a student's potential to become a writer or editor or perhaps an educator instructing the next generation in literary craft. In tonight's keynote speaker, Mary Jo Salter, we find a poet, editor, librettist, playwright, and professor dedicated to literary endeavor in its many intersecting forms. Over the past few years, Washington College has been extremely fortunate to build a relationship with Mary Jo Salter. Although her books are released exclusively through the renowned publishing house Knopf, in 2014 she made an exception to this rule. Salter collaborated with the Literary House Press at the Rose O'Neill Literary House to produce an exquisite, limited edition letterpress volume of poems entitled Lost Originals. Lost Originals takes its title from the writings of William Blake, a poet who, like Salter, was known for engaging in many literary endeavors. He was an illustrator, a printer, a bookmaker. Lost Originals is a series of poems that mourn the passing of loved ones, of other writers, and of other ways of understanding the world. For instance, in an elegy called In the Afterlife, Salter describes a visitor to the artifacts of the underworld as illiterate. But these poems, their ease with formal modes, their syntactical elegance, their unforced, dexterous handling of meter, show us a poet who is fully literate in the language of mourning. And yet, even when grief is the subject, we shouldn't feel sad after reading Salter's work. As critic James Loganbach explains in a 2008 review of Salter's book, A Phone Call to the Future, her poems are, quote, driven by a compulsion to confront the inexplicable. Isn't that beautiful? A compulsion to confront the inexplicable. It's this boldness, this willingness to pursue language, even about the most piercing moments in human experience, which meets in Mary Jo Salter's work, and which, I dare say, we hope to meet in our students' writing as well. Salter's poems talk about travel, the visual arts, the philosophical, and often, most movingly, the domestic. In an interview with the literary journal New Letters, Salter once explained, if we don't address the small and daily or the seemingly small, then we aren't really talking about what it's like to live in the world. Yet, whatever the topic, Her poems are unified by their meticulous craft. Like her early teacher, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Elizabeth Bishop, Salter creates the illusion of effortlessly constructed verse, even as we recognize each of her choices as deliberate, thoughtful, and powerful. Such unstudied, natural writing can only be the result of years of study and practice. And while many readers may consider formal verse safe, stodgy, Salter's poems are anything but. Instead, her writing is known for its fierceness. As critic Dan Kaysen argues, in Salter's hands, meter makes the meter-making argument, clinching, checkmating, twisting the knife in that much deeper. Salter's formal verse transforms melting icicles into sharpened blades. Reading her poetry is like reading a knife. Bedsheets become letterhead on which one composes serrated stanzas about divorce. There's beauty in this kind of formal elegance, but it never comes at the cost of truth. Mary Jo Salter is the author of 7 books of poetry, all published by Knopf, including, most recently, Nothing by Design and A Phone Call to the Future. Along with Margaret Ferguson and John Stallworthy, she is co-editor of the Norton Anthology of Poetry. You may have heard of that. In 2007, Salter became a permanent member of the Writing Seminars faculty at the Johns Hopkins University after 23 years of teaching at Mount Holyoke College. She serves now as co-chair of the department. In an interview from 2005, Mary Jo discussed her own early journey toward becoming a writer. Quote, "By the time I entered college, poetry had become the center of my life. Hard to say why, except that, as many poets have said before me, writing a new poem always feels like falling in love. Reading poems, too, often feels like that." To read the work of Mary Jo Salter is to learn the ways that poems teach us to love. This, too, is the meaning of a life engaged in literary endeavor, dedication, commitment, and ultimately, love. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Mary Jo Salter.
Oh my goodness, this evening is not about me, but thank you so much, James. That was really very, very kind. I'm so honored to be here, and what a pleasure to be at the Enoch Pratt Library. I had the honor of reading here with one of my Johns Hopkins students a few years ago, and it's a great pleasure to be back among the very wise and good people from Washington College who do everything they can to make creative writing a joy and a life endeavor for their students. The college's literary house and the press named after it have done me great honor, as you've heard, in publishing me, and it's gratifying to be among those handing out the honors today to a graduating student. No other college in the United States, and I assume no other college in the world, bestows a greater sum of money to a graduating college senior for writing than with the sum of the Sophie Kerr Prize. I can imagine that the finalists in this year's competition are keenly aware of the monetary difference between winning and not winning. You'd have to be a fool not to notice, and the winner would have to be a fool not to be grateful. But beyond money, the difference in encouragement each of the student finalists feel should be, or so I hope, negligible. That's one of the things I've learned in my own literary career. If you're in the running, you've won. If you're writing and rewriting and trying, practicing and practicing, you've won. The novelist and short story writer Richard Bausch gave a lecture at the Sewanee Writers' Conference a few years ago. In fact, I think he's given it several times, in which he listed all the questions a writer should not ask himself while he's writing. Here are a few of the forbidden questions as I remember them. How do I get an agent? Will my agent like this? Will I ever get an editor? What if I don't agree with my editor's changes? Is this long enough? Is this short enough? Will I get a big advance? Will this thing I'm writing be made into a movie? will I get famous? The only question Richard Bausch allows himself to ask at the end of a day is, did I write today? That's all. Did I write today? If you didn't write, you didn't get any better. If you didn't write, you can't get rich or famous on what you didn't write. At the end of the day, just ask yourself, did I write today? That sort of wisdom is easier to accept from a published writer, admittedly. When you're young, unpublished, or hardly published, you're not sure you can afford to be philosophical, least of all patient about writing. It's a funny paradox. Because you're young, you have the likely luxury of many decades left to live. Yet because you're young and have great stores of energy, you're always in a hurry. To put the paradox another way, it's the older writer, the person who has less time left, who takes more of it. The older writer knows the value of patience, how efficient it is to slow down, pay attention to detail, and not jump to the conclusion that whatever you're writing is already the best you can do. Yet the young writer definitely has a huge advantage over the older one. Call it hubris. The young writer, even if he is well-read for his age, knows fewer works. The young writer may very well not know samples of excellence by writers who have already expressed beautifully what the young writer wishes to express. Other poets may well have thought of your seemingly original rhyme. Other dramatists have thought of your revolutionary stage direction. Other novelists have imagined the same surprising plot twist. Because you're young, you don't know that as fully as, say, somebody your parents' age. And because you don't know that, you go ahead and tackle the age-old questions, or tell the old jokes, or cry the old tears, but you do it in unconsciously modern ways. And sometimes, however rarely, you actually have a chance of doing your thing better than the greats. The greats got great, after all, by daring to write, by being able to answer yes to the question, did I write today? So, where do I get all this annoying wisdom, what I'm presenting to you as wisdom? I imagine I get it from my own humiliations as a writer, which began in college. Believe me, young writers, you are not alone. College was when I first got published, but it's also when I first got rejected. It was when I first won prizes, but also when I first lost them. In my senior year at Harvard, 1976, I was lucky enough to represent my college at a long-established intercollegiate poetry contest, the Catherine Eileen Glasscock Poetry Competition, held annually at Mount Holyoke College. It was a big deal lasting several days with fancy lunches and dinners and hundreds of listeners to our work. We contestants were 6 students representing 6 different colleges, including the host, Mount Holyoke. I thought somehow I would win, as I imagined each of us did. And like 4 of the other students, I lost. It felt to me like losing because the people who gave me the second prize were my poetry heroes: Richard Wilbur, Stephen Spender, Marilyn Hacker. Yes, I felt just slightly kicked in the stomach. But what I remember best was that the judges found it easy to be modest, easy not to patronize us student writers. That day, when I had to blink away a few tears that I hadn't won, I fell in love with the great Richard Wilbur, not just for his work, not just for his movie star handsomeness, but for the immense graciousness with which he encouraged us all. When you talked to him about poetry, and I felt I was babbling to him about poetry, he looked right at you and answered as if to a peer. You could tell that Wilbur recognized, as Thomas Jefferson wrote in a completely different context, that the earth belongs to the living. What Jefferson meant was that the people on top are only on top for a little while. They die, and then the living keep going. It's the living who are the makers of law, the dispensers of justice, the arbiters of taste and custom. I take this to mean, too, that it's the living who get to be the makers and judges of art for their own generation. I should add a really happy coda to this college story. Richard Wilbur, who was 55 when I met him, is still alive. He's 93, and he's still writing new poetry collections. I developed a friendship with him some years after college, and I still think he's America's best poet, among the living, that is. His technical gifts are immense. His ability to express a complex thought in a richly nuanced, long, metrical, rhymed sentence has not diminished, but I've also noticed that his poetry gets simpler and simpler, and thus more moving. He isn't trying to prove anything, least of all his own preeminence. He wants to say something, whatever he can, about life, with the tools he has. People with this kind of wisdom don't need any fancy tricks to make you feel it. There's another coda to the story of the poetry contest at Mount Holyoke College. When I was there, I heard about a student poet a year older than I, now graduated, who had won the Glasgow contest both of the preceding 2 years, and who had dazzled all of her professors so thoroughly that she may as well have been named Emily Dickinson. And indeed, Emily Dickinson had been one of Mount Holyoke's earliest students in the 1830s. This new bright star on the poetry scene had the not particularly melodic name of Gertrude Schnackenberg. I was about to meet her about 5 years later, and she remains one of my closest friends more than 30 years after that. In my humble opinion, I write pretty well, but she writes better. If I had to award a prize, I'd say she is the greatest poet of my generation. It doesn't hurt me to say that because I have learned as the years have passed that I am on a team poetry, and that all good poems written all over the world add to that team's accomplishments. We all win. The only question to answer about my own work is, am I the best, or even, did I do my best, but did I write today? I want to close with a short poem Gertrude Schnackenberg wrote when she had just graduated from Mount Holyoke. Her senior thesis with edits and additions became her first published book. The poem I'll read to you is part of a longer sequence called 19 Hadley Street. It was about an old house she was living in, that is, nothing special to anybody else. But she dared to imagine in her early 20s that somebody might be reading in the future what she wrote today. She dared to imagine that the place and time she stood in could be recorded by the person she then was. And in her poem, she dared to imagine backwards to record the lives of generations who died in her house before she was born. The section I'll read to you takes place in 1905. A little girl named Elizabeth is embroidering a sampler on her lawn under the benign shade of a pear tree. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that Schnackenberg was implying that poetry, too, is a little square of recorded life. Elizabeth's sampler endures, as the pear tree endures, and Schnackenberg's poem may endure, as the work any of you young writers dare to do may endure. The only way to imagine forward or back 100 years is to dare living fully in the real moment in which you do your imagining. You can't ever write a poem as good as this one unless you write. And now for Schnackenberg's very short poem. Elizabeth, 1905. Elizabeth bounces like a small white moth across the lawn, settling beneath a tree to stitch her square of half-embroidered cloth, embroidering a house and family. In blue and pink, words stream across the skies, God bless our home. The movement of her eyes, the motion of her arm pulling the thread. She is one with the little girl she sewed. Above her bent and concentrating head, the 100-year-old pear tree buds explode. Well, that's all I have to say. And now I'd like to introduce our readers. I'll name them each as they come up. The first is Grace Arenas.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let's see. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So I'm going to be reading two pieces today. The first is an excerpt from a longer lyric piece, and the title of this piece is The Birth of Aphrodite. A peach, unripe or otherwise, is a member of the rose family, and the rose belongs to Aphrodite, thorns and all. A prophecy made over Chinese takeout. Boys might not look at you, but men will. Pothos, god of sexual longing, was the son of Aphrodite. Himeros, god of desire, was the son of Aphrodite. Eros, god of love, was the son of Aphrodite. always sons of Aphrodite, who choose the way that wanting works. My 6-foot love god wannabe was one of those not boys, one of those peach pluckers. If Aphrodite had liked his shaggy hair, she might have hoarded him all to herself. She got possessive like that, clutching her lover's laurel-wreathed heads to her breasts, and didn't they pillow there so perfectly? There was flesh enough to give way, the natural effect when you're out of training bras. Maybe that was the issue. I found myself with nature's disadvantage. But I fit in the palm of his hand, so maybe I was still made for him, though my proportions were less than ideal, couldn't be concealed with the forgiving drape of a toga. I made up for it wherever I could. Sample perfumes, thick fruit lip gloss, he taught me how to smudge it off. Aphrodite taught the boys who left a lesson. Nereides, her first love, sentenced to ooze eternally along the seafloor for his slight. And though the myths don't quite tell it this way, I know she sent that boar after Adonis. He'd been out hunting, missed their date. She was bored, ignored, and sulking. She offered the beast a t-shirt, yellow-stained, reeking of cologne, and off it charged to gore him through the chest. He chose the way my wanting worked, decided when a kiss to the neck was enough, wasn't nearly enough. Like Aphrodite, I was a mix of blood and sperm and sea, but didn't know that wasn't all I'd get to be. But wait, there's more. And the poem that I'm going to conclude with is called On Cannibalizing a Poem for the Sake of an Essay. And it plays on the 3 definitions of the verb to cannibalize. And so before each section of the poem, the definition is read. On cannibalizing a poem for the sake of an essay. 1. Of a machine. To use as a source of parts for another similar machine. First, determine what is broken and what is viable. Discard scrap metaphor. Do this with precision. Do not forget the value of alliterative alloys, of polished cogs. When it comes to spare parts, chuck them away. 2. Of a company. To reduce the sales of one of its products by introducing a similar competing product. Think of the marketing campaign. Think of the pithy tagline, now in bold new prose form. Think of the burden removed from stressed PR interns with boss to impress, quota to fill. Think of men outside on sidewalks, poems in their pockets, who catch nickels and iams in styrofoam cups. 3. Of an animal. To eat an animal of its own kind. Drown out the crunch of bones with the beat of an unbound line. Ignore the blood. Decide words cannot breathe, space starved, packed in a finite den. Know this, that the fittest will survive. You can choose to kill your young, learn how to stomach it, sacrifice the runt. And on that note, thank you very much.
Next is Peter Fortenbaugh.
Hello. I'm going to read you some excerpts from a short story, and all of my work comes from a fictional island. It's all set on a fictional island down on the southern part of Maryland's eastern shore. So this is sort of an introduction entitled Their Island. I want to start by having you drive the 22 miles from the county seat of Cambridge to the island of Johnsontown. You head west out Route 16, and almost immediately you leave behind the housing complexes and gas stations that outline the footprints of our civilizations. Soon, even the fields and trees become mostly water and reeds. You turn south onto Hogleg Road and pass a few abandoned houses that sag into the wet ground, utterly surrounded by the endless, perfectly level needle rush of the Dorchester County marshes. The colors all around seem taken from old sepia-toned photographs. Black water comes and goes through the wide ditches, twice a day creeping up onto the raised roadbed and then receding, leaving behind a footprint of marsh grasses and mud on the blue tar and chip. Just ahead of your car, a heron rises up from the ditches with an easy beat of its wide wings. Ospreys and eagles watch over the watery land from the white skeletons of dead pines that pierce through the marsh's otherwise unbroken landscape, like bony fingers pointing out the climbing waters of the bay. You've got to cross a half a dozen county road bridges, rising over the web of oily sloughs that tangle through the marsh. The bridges can claim the highest elevation for miles around, and it's from one such creosote-coated wooden structure, the Ellis Creek Bridge, that you get your first look at Johnsontown. From a distance, it's just a white steeple and a chalky blue water tower, like a shimmering mirage above the road's surface. But as you get closer, details seem to flicker, but don't lose faith and turn around. You must convince yourself that this swaying collection of clanging masts at marina docks, the businesses and houses clustered just above the water like a flock of birds, and the last few stoic trees clinging to the marshy ground are real. You must convince yourself that this town actually exists out there, huddled against the will of the bay, against the will of even the sinking, wet ground on which it crouches. To enter the world of Johnsontown, you must cross one final bridge, a concrete two-lane drawbridge, the Sugar Bradshaw Memorial Bridge, most often referred to as the bridge, but sometimes affectionately just called Sugar. Crossing its mild height in the spring or the summertime, you can see the brown water beneath you buzzing with water skiers, chicken neckers, and sailors. If you get caught by the planetary pull of this place, you can watch the months and seasons sifting by. In the fall, the water toughens itself, and you can bear witness to the small handful of charter boats and the last faded oystermen that keep heading out. When winter comes, the whole town seems to shiver with nowhere to hide from the wind that booms across the wide water. Waves constantly lick the island's western shore, foaming at the mouth as they slowly digest the land. You must remember, as all islanders do in the back of their minds, that this place is disappearing. January ice builds on the calm water of James Creek, forming another fragile bridge between the island and the mainland. At first, the ice is knit across the surface like a papery web, but as the wind brings the temperature down, the ice thickens until it's strong enough to uproot pilings with the rising tide. You can sit at Callahan's family store and watch the ice stealing across the water. You may not be an islander, and I am certainly not, but if we are respectful and attentive listeners, we might hear old Earl Nicholson or Bill Callahan open up and reminisce on days when the ice was thick enough that the town would drag old tires out on the creek. Men with coal oil and metal cans would start the tires burning, and everyone would spend the evening skating around and around, getting close enough to cautiously warm their hands from the edge of the weakening ice until darkness closed in, and all at once the ice caved and the burning tires slipped beneath the water with a hiss of smoke and steam. Thank you.
Our next reader is Alex Stinton.
Hello, I have 3 poems tonight. Somewhere on the eastern shore. Last light collects across the creek, and there, like jadeite or in a dream, it grows in evergreen hollows. The water carries a softening music. Somewhere, someone's lit a fire. The wet smell of hearth opens to the sky, and farther off, a loud door shuts, settles. Who knew we'd never go west, that the veins down this neck of the woods would keep us? I imagine our primeval pioneer, ear to the ground, finger finding windward, like an auger in the heart of things. He must have gazed on collapsed light and place creeping both inward and away. Tides shift, yes, but come morning I'll see jets trail a railway for the sun, and the whole country asleep, knowing its station is fixed, if forgotten, necessary as the split-second silence between some and where. A mother remembers. And I am an astronomer. I crave galaxies. My eyes sharpen through winter windows, up along the moon-shaded mare, then to the mute Morse code of the universe. The stars twinkle, twinkle. I lie thinking of the silence that spreads solar systems, the drift of a black deep sea sending all its golden fish to eddy farther and farther away over time, something unwitting, of consequence, an infection whose pin-beaked molecules prick the body's streams. And to remember this, O little starlet, forever fingerling, is to admit how light air luminous I felt the night you sank soundlessly from your crib into dark matter, how the universe did not twist or reel like a net trawled up, but stretched a hand to trace your face in constellation. And this last one, Snapshots of Arizona, it takes as its epigraph a line from Neil Young in the song Ambulance Blues, and the line is, quote, "It's hard to say the meaning of this song." Snapshots of Arizona. I grew to hate them, always a spotless sky interrupted by the cut desert cliffs, each red in its own blackening way. Always, too, the sun hangs just out of frame, a gesture hidden like God's hand, touching everything. And if I display them somewhere ages and ages hence as a slideshow, say for the grandkids, I'd set it to Neil Young's On the Beach, all 39 minutes, 40 seconds of it, and remember the smile that beleaguered each exposure. Thank you.
And now, Kimberly Uslin.
Intelligent design. And on the seventh day, God popped open an IPA, settled into his Adirondack, and slapped a mosquito, holy blood on his hands. Considering the body sprawled and seeping in his palm, he wondered maybe if he'd made the world wrong. Next, I'm going to read a piece of short fiction, and I'm going to finish with a poem. This is The Head or the Haunches. Helen was back, and she wanted her buffalo. It had been 42 weeks, and now the bitch was back, planning to waltz into his life, grab her buffalo, and go. Len hated the damn thing. He'd only taken it because Helen had stolen the Phillies-themed key to his apartment that he'd paid an extra $3 for, and his signed Bob Dylan record. She was always doing shit like that, taking the little things in life that he didn't realize he loved. So he'd taken the buffalo, hidden it after she finished repacking her suitcases for the final time. He knew she would forget to double-check, even though she claimed it was her spirit animal, the stone token she'd brought back from a soul-searching trip to New Mexico. He remembered the beatific look on her face when she had returned from the trip, the smell of saguaro oil emanating from her pores as she spoke endlessly of the sun. She had presented him with gifts like some New Age magus, a dried chili painted like Santa Claus for the Christmas tree, a silver and turquoise necklace he never wore, and the Santa Fe t-shirt that he'd changed out of this morning. In preparation for her coming, he'd instead donned a sandy yellow button-down that he knew she loved but had not bought for him. The buffalo, of course, had been her gift to herself. It was apparently the Native American symbol for finding inner strength, but Len came to see it as the Native American symbol for being a huge bitch. The figure was about the size of a piggy bank, carved out of some precious stone with 2 chunks of turquoise for beady eyes. The day she brought it back was the beginning of the end. She hated him now, and he hated the buffalo, which stood dumbly on his nightstand as it had since the evening she had left. He glanced at it, rubbing his thumb over the slight hump in its back like he did every morning. The stone there was smoother from his daily ritual. He wondered if she would notice the change, if she would think that he had done it on purpose. He had. Len didn't understand why Helen was coming back for it now, after all of those buffalo-less weeks. She had, after all, called him the moment she discovered its absence. He had offered to ship it to her that day, to leave it up to fate and FedEx, but she had insisted that she had to come back for it herself, that she couldn't risk anything terrible happening to it. Len picked it up, feeling its cool weight in his hands. At this point, it was practically his buffalo anyway. He had considered briefly the idea of waiting for Helen to arrive and then throwing the figure to the ground, making her watch it shatter. He could imagine the scene perfectly, the way her yellow eyes would widen, stretching out the wrinkles in their corners, how she'd probably scream. He would kick some remaining piece, the head or the haunches, and say something really clever,
That's what you did to my heart. Something like that. Something real smooth. But when he'd thought about it, he realized that the hard stone buffalo probably wouldn't shatter, and then it'd just be chipped and ruined, some eye rolling down the sidewalk or a bit of the lucky hump slipping into the gutter. He'd hate that. And this is Tour of Duty. The laundry hangs over the balcony, white t-shirts spreading their empty arms. You're flashing a peace sign as my camera rolls, rec blinking in the corner. Your eyes never leave the red light. In the background, the TV shows scenes from a distant war. When I watch the tape years later, the violence is nothing but a window of blue haze, and all I can see are your fingers. My little brother's voice spirals up the staircase, calling for dinner or the dishes, but your eyes follow the light. When it goes out, you go out. I cut the tape, look at you, but you're looking at the laundry, swaying like a flag in the wind. Thank you.
And finally, Kay Wicker.
Why does everyone say the blue's a woman? To me, the blue seems like a man. It's men who brood, and it's men who wail, and it's men who love women. A woman, if you're not careful, will bring about the blues. The soul of a woman is girlish and bright, but it's honest with you at night. Her legs, what's at the top, right in the center, is warm until it's not for you anymore. And just like Muddy, you can't be satisfied. You'll be thinking evil like that howling wolf. The soul of a woman is girlish and bright, but it's honest with you at night. A million things could be wrong, but all you'll notice is when the love is gone. So is the blues a woman, or the lack of one? And these next two pieces are from a jazz essay on the blues. When I first arrived, I couldn't find her. It was arresting how unfazed by her the place felt. This was the jazz city, but there wasn't even one saxophone. You giving up on me? I heard her ask. Sitting in the middle of the Schomburg Research Library in Harlem, I was at times overwhelmed and underwhelmed by the information that surrounded me. The goal I was seeking to achieve was simple enough: extract relevant information to further a creative nonfiction piece chronicling jazz. There I was, surrounded by all that culture, and yet I felt lost somehow. I'd see one of the names I was studying, such as Hughes or Baker, and I would jot down a relevant note. I couldn't help but feeling like my purpose was shallow, or at the very least frivolous. My excitement for my topic was stifled by the fear that no one else would find value in what my efforts would produce. When I heard the news that Amiri Baraka had lost his battle, of course I was met with sadness. But it also became clear to me that what I was doing was a necessary thing. It was not merely a coincidence that while I was tracing through Harlem, the great Baraka died. He has a quote: "When I die, the consciousness I carry, I will to black people. May they pick me apart and take the useful parts, the sweet meat of my feelings, and leave the bitter bullshit rotten white parts alone." And I was there in Harlem doing that very thing. There I was, picking through the carcasses of these ancestral artists for what was valuable to me, like a vulture. Only my decaying matter was a voice. "My voice," she whispered. She swam off, clenching the coattails of the king players and the sweet dancers. She did not leave all at once, though. With Louis went her mouth, with Langston went her eyes, with Ellison went her ears, then her nose, throat, and with Josephine went her bloody heart. I've only heard stories of what happened to her while she was there. She would get roaring drunk, as F. Scott would say, and meet her mornings with a hazy scowl. She had to learn French, and when she did, she trained up in their men and other such vices. They loved her too, all of them. But that's all hearsay. I won't know for sure until I'm there. Just like I did not believe she would smell like jasmine until I was eating red beans and rice in the French Quarter. I knew she was loud in Harlem, but it took seeing how quiet that place is now to really understand. I want to know if she tasted like golden champagne. I want to know if she really did break hearts more than she loved people. I want to know her. So here I stand, pining for Paris. Thank you.
Thank you all. I enjoyed hearing you so much, all of you. It was wonderful. This is apparently the Oscar envelope. I don't know what's in it. Congratulations again to all of you for how well you've done. And the winner of the Sophie Kerr Prize is Alexander Stinton.
Wow, thank you. I'm speechless. I don't have a speech. What a great group this year of finalists. It's actually really humiliating, I don't know if that's the right word, to be up here with 4 awesome and really unique writers just to your left. So it was a real honor to be among this group. I'd like to thank my family. Seated in here. Catherine, thank you. At Washington College, I'd like to thank the English department as a whole, but specifically Dr. Mooney, who got me through. He made sure I actually graduated and everything, but got me through my thesis pretty well, and Dr. Gillen, there he is down there, for Kipling Hall and Romanticism, especially the class, not Romanticism. That's it took an interesting turn. Dr. Hall, for even though we only worked together for about a semester, I think it was, as my poetry mentor, helping me get straight for graduate school and just to write as well as I can, I suppose. God, I know I'm forgetting people. Dr. Dubrow, who is unable to be here tonight. I better end there because I'm just going to continue rambling, but thank you.
Stay if you want.
I don't really want to. May I just sit down?
Okay, yes, you may. Well, this ends our program for the evening. I want to congratulate Alex again and all of the finalists. Let's have another round of applause for all of them. We are proud of you. Your families are proud of you. More importantly, I hope you are proud of yourselves because you've earned this. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.